So perhaps just before we start, maybe I introduce myself quickly and why I'm here. So my name is Willy Legrand, as you can see here. So I've got a French background. I was born in France, but I grew up and studied in Canada, both in the east coast of Canada in Quebec, as well as the center of Canada in Winnipeg, for whoever knows much about geography. And then I studied geography. My background, my first study is actually geography. I then went on to study hospitality management, and I worked on Vancouver Island, which is on the west coast of Canada, in hospitality in the 90s. I moved back to Europe about 13 years ago, and I am based in Bonn, Germany, where I've been lecturing at a university for the past decade, 10 years. And one of my expertise, I've continued my studies, and I've done a master's degree in business with a focus on corporate environmental management. And I've completed my PhD now in business management. So it's trying to combine the hospitality experience with business studies and environmental management. I'm very happy to be in Estonia. It's the second time, even though the very first time I spent about 8 hours in Estonia, so I can't really say that I've been in Estonia before, so this is really the first time. I lecture usually in Germany, but I lecture in France and in Singapore and in Peru and in Dubai, and I'm very happy to be here in the north and hold lecture with university students and spend time with people that are in the industry. So today's seminar, I don't know if you've seen, there's 4 parts to it. So I guess it's a bit of a long day, but there's plenty of breaks. So that should make it digestible, let's say. The first part will be about environmental management systems. It is a little bit of an upside down triangle. So I start very large, and I lead sort of a bit of a general discussion, and partly a bit of a philosophy discussion. So it's really taking you out of your comfort zone, which is really the industry usually, to discuss a bit about more general, before I go throughout the day in more precise, in-depth material. So we start with the environmental management system. We'll look at some marketing issues in the second part. In the third part, I will be talking about energy and carbon mitigation issues. And the last part, I'll just be sharing some of my experience with best practices around the globe. If you have questions, you just raise your hand. There will be a few activities which I'd like to ask you to participate in throughout the seminars. But I also have a bit of a sort of formal lecture to start with, right? Because everybody's sort of, you just got here and you can just listen a little bit to what I have to say, and then we can engage in discussions. Good morning. So what we do as well is we try to be relevant, so not only in academia, but to be relevant with the hospitality industry. Together with some colleagues of mine, Philip Sloan and Joseph Chen. Philip is from the UK. Joseph is originally from China, but works at the university in the States. We combine our different source of knowledge and expertise, and we've created some textbooks, which are relevant textbooks for university students, but also for the industry. This is the second edition of one of our textbooks, which is called Sustainability in Hospitality Industry. So it's really hotel-based. And I'm very happy because many actors in the industry have provided great case studies for this textbook, including not only hotels, but certification schemes such as Green Key, for example, and as well as hotel, of course, destinations, conference organizers. They've provided case studies about their practices or their best practices. So that's what we do as well. So beside holding lectures and seminars, we do quite a bit of research. We've got a website that we've put together, which is called Sustainability in Hospitality. But at this point, the website is really gathering news about sustainability in this industry. So we don't have much time to participate in putting other things. So right now what we do is we gather news, and it's a source, right? It's a source for news that can be used by the industry, but also by academics, fellow colleagues, and students. The rationale for this morning, and as I told you, we'll start sort of fairly large. So I'm going to take you a little bit on a travel, let's put it this way. And since I lecture quite a bit around the globe, students always send me materials they find, which they find interesting and which they think is relevant to what we do. And recently I've received this little poster, which you may have seen as well, which I think provides a pretty good rationale of why we're here. So it reads like this. It's pretty amazing that our society has reached a point where the effort necessary to extract oil from the ground, ship it to a refinery, turn it into plastic, shape it appropriately, truck it into a store, buy it, and bring it home is considered to be less effort than what it takes to just wash the spoons when you're done with it. Which I think is quite interesting, because this is a little bit what we do. Yeah, we've sort of freed ourselves with the amount of energy we have. We've freed ourselves from many constraints, and we just consume and don't think so much about it. So that provides, I thought this was quite an interesting poster that was sent to me. The real rationale, however, I think can be better summarized by John Beddington, who was the UK chief scientist back in 2009. He discussed this idea of the perfect storm. So what is the perfect storm facing us? And the perfect storm is like this. He argued that when we look a little bit into the future, we are facing some drastic issues, which most of you are aware. And he put it in a bit of a formula. And the formula is like this. It's food shortages plus water scarcity plus costly oil plus climate change plus mass migration. That will probably give us the ultimate recession with little or no recovery. The point is, he said that in 2009. As you know, in 2008 was the start of a financial economic recession. And he wanted to say, if you think the economic recession is a big deal, wait till you have that ultimate recession. And so it was a way for him to try to wake up governments and industry leaders about some of the challenges. And so I've decided to just take that as a base sort of for the rationale of why we're actually sitting here in the first place. Why do we discuss issues around sustainability, environmental management, social equity, and so on? So I've taken those and I've taken them apart. And I said, okay, food shortages. What does that mean? What does that look like, food shortages? Well, the Food and Agriculture Organization predict an increased demand by 50% by 2030, following the population needs. Usually when I talk to people and I say, well, what is the situation with food currently? I mean, do we produce enough food to feed everyone on the globe? And the answer is, currently we actually do. We do produce enough to feed everyone with 2,700 calories per day. And so obviously there are problems. There are problems of production waste, and there's problem of distribution waste, and there's problem of consumption waste. It is a bit interesting to see that we do have 1 billion people that do not eat enough, and you do have 1 billion people that are overweight and obese. And so we have here this big imbalance in the way that we function with food. So there is an increased demand by 50%, but if you think about the amount of food that's currently being produced, as I said, there's enough to feed everyone. And you add to this the fact that really 1/3 of the food goes to waste. There's actually 2 fantastic documentaries that came out over the past 2 years. And one of them is called Taste the Waste, which I think is quite relevant, especially for the European society. It really tracks waste at consumption stage, because that's the bulk of our waste. In developing economies, the bulk of the waste is in production because of bad storage, because of bad harvesting techniques. Good morning. So that's where the waste is taking place. We in the EU waste at the consumption stage somewhere around 90 kilograms of perfectly edible food per year. So that's where we have most of our issues. So if you reduce the waste and if you have a proper distribution system, food is not a problem anymore. But currently we do have a problem at hand. Then the second part, he said, but water scarcity, what does it look like? Here this is an increased demand by 30% by 2030. Now water is also an interesting concept, because I've taken, this is always interesting when you first see, I think it's Apollo 11 when it took a picture of the Earth. People noticed that it's a blue dot. It's blue because we've got so much water. How much water do we have? What is the percentages water to land on the planet? Do you know approximately? Yeah, we sort of have 70% is water, and we've got 30%, which is land. I mean, and of course you will say, yes, of course there's lots of water, but most of that water is salt water, and you're quite right. Of that salt water, we have, water, we've got 97%, which was what we call saline water from the oceans. And we have 3% water, which is fresh water. And you can even further the issue with water. This is why we talk about water scarcity. There's actually lots of water out there. The thing is, with 3% fresh water, about 69% is in ice. It's glacier. Right. Then you've got another 30%, which is groundwater, which is not always easily accessible. And you've got really 0.3%, which is surface water, water that's readily available. Right. And this surface water is what people go to fight for, that 0.3%. There's still another 0.7% missing there, that's moisture in the land and so on. So the idea is there is water scarcity, but we have so much water. Is there a way that it's a matter of access to that saline water in a way? What can we do with saline water? Of course, you will tell me, well, we can desalinate it. The amount of energy, of course, taken in desalinating water is massive currently. But with new technologies, who knows? Perhaps we can free ourselves for having water scarcity by 2030. So that's another issue which is brought up by Beddington. And the last one that he brings up, well, actually, he still has this idea of climate change and mass migration, which is fair enough. Is this idea of costly oil. And the demand, so this is numbers by the International Energy Agency, increased demand by 50% by 2030. Now, what's interesting is this idea of peak oil. So we did not use oil, we use it all, and we are in the process of using it all. And then there's no more oil. So this is, right, sort of industrial revolution up to in the next few years. That's when we use, that's why we developed. And so obviously there's a great demand to think of alternatives to be able to power our hotels, for example. So this idea of peak oil, there is still great resources of oil, and there are different techniques now that are very debated. We know that one of the biggest reserves in Saudi Arabia. Canada has got a great amount of oil, but this is oil that's in a sand. It's a tar sand, which you need to separate the oil from the sand. So there's great reserve, but it takes water to do so. It's very damaging to the environment, so it's very questionable whether it's worth it, whether it's worth to actually get the energy and the water to be able to get the energy out of the sand, which is basically what we're doing. And you might follow the news, especially here within the EU, about the fracking technology to be able to get what's in the bedrock, all the gas or oil that's in the bedrock, and trying to get it out, which is what's happening in the US. So there's lots of questions about that, about the practices. But what's interesting is to sort of see how much energy is out there. Again, this is a fantastic picture. You probably, maybe you've read the news. We had different storm on the surface of the sun that has happened One was recently, a couple of weeks ago, and this is what the storm looks like. And this is a great picture because that's our little Earth to scale of that storm. The amount of energy that comes from the solar radiation that hits the Earth per year can power all our needs probably about 20,000 times over. So there is a lot of solar radiation hitting the surface of the Earth, but the problem is the access of it. So it's not that there's no energy out there, there is plenty of it, but it's the access to it. Right, with solar panels and so on, the technology needs to be involved. So again, maybe it needs a change in thinking about energy. So there is a lot out there, but how to get access to it. It's the same as water. There is a lot out there, but how to get access to it. These are the issues that are really facing us more than anything else. Okay. So that sort of sets a little bit this idea of, right, there are some challenges you can add. I don't have to spend so much time on it, but you can add the issues of climate change. And you may argue again that in certain section of Northern Europe, you may have actually gain benefit from some of the climate change in terms of weather pattern, possibly. Whereas some southern part, whether we talk about the coastal Spain or southern France, Italy, may have a negative effect. And of course, it greatly influences the travel pattern, tourism pattern. People don't want to go where places are really just too hot, unbearable. You could imagine that in a snow resort, there might be some issues in the Alps and so on. So overall, I think the net benefits do not outweigh what the problems are in terms of tourism, at least. Because you may argue that in Estonia or northern Germany and so on, actually perhaps you will benefit from having more clement temperature with a longer perhaps summer period and things like that. It's not for sure that that will be the case. And mass migration, obviously when things are bad at home, people will move. And it might not be bad in Estonia, it might not be bad in Germany, but it's bad in many other places. And if it's bad at home, then you will move. And he said the argument from Beddington is this migration will cause disruption in economies where those people are moving. Okay, so that is sort of, I don't want to bring you down here now with this, but I think it's important to just realize, okay, some of the issues that we're facing with, and it sets sort of the base on which we can start talking. That's The Perfect Storm by John Beddington. So I usually ask, so can we afford to continue business as usual? Obviously, probably not. In the current system that we're in, I mean, we basically, I've based our economy on extraction of resources to be able to consume those and to have waste creation. But we have an imbalance, it's clear, of overexploitation and depletion of resources. So how long can we afford to have this depletion, overexploitation is questionable. And we obviously, although our economy, when we operate a hotel or when we operate an economy, it's based on this growth paradigm. Growth is fairly important because, of course, it's a matter of creation of employment. It's a matter of being better off. And so the growth paradigm is actually currently based still very much on overexploitation. So it's very difficult, it seems, to move the growth paradigm to think about, is it possible for us to keep growing without necessarily overexploiting those resources? This is the idea of transition economies, transition towards a low carbon economy, the idea of being able to grow the economy but without overexploiting the resources. So it's obviously a larger discussion, but it has implication to the way that we operate our industry as well. So time to think of solution. This is where I say I'm going to take you a little bit on a philosophy course here, a little bit, I guess, because solutions, actually, there are lots of solutions out there, but there's really two philosophical approaches which I'd like to share with you. There's the Malthusian approach and there's the Solovian approach. So Malthusian, a British thinker, and Robert Solow, an American economist, have come up with their own set of ideas about how to deal with global challenges. And so let me just share with you what it looks like. Malthusian. This is based on an article written by Martin and Kempler. It's called Saving the Planet, A Tale of Two Strategies. You can buy it at the Harvard Business Review. And in there it says the Malthusian believed that limits to growth are imposed by nature and cannot overcome by man. In other words, it's not up to us. It's nature that sets the rules, and we have to deal with it. His basic system looks like this, his basic theory. He says we have a quantity and we have time. And he says basically population growth looks like this. And he was quite right, because it looks like this, right? It's very steep curve upwards in terms of population growth. However, the access and use of resources is rather more of a straight line. And he says at one point we're going to hit that corner here, and we call this the Malthus catastrophe, where suddenly you have population out of line and you have the amount, the access and the use of resources which doesn't keep up. You have a surplus and you have a deficit. And this is where he says that's the Malthus catastrophe. So if you look at this, the natural consequence, if we want to deal with the problem, will be to restrain ourselves. To restrain ourselves in consuming, to restrain ourselves from having babies perhaps, right? This is the consequence of his theory, is we have to restrain ourselves. So what does it look like to restrain yourself? Well, this typical reusing, recycling system is a Malthusian thinking. It is really Malthusian. It's like, well, we are going to reuse things. We are going to recycle things. We are perhaps going to refuse things. It's very much these 3 R's or perhaps 4 R's, right? Refuse, reduce, reuse, recycle. This is very Malthusian thinking in terms of restraints. The Solovian is quite different. It's very small here, but maybe I can just quickly read it. Capital. So this is from the Solovian, again from the same article. Capital that takes advantage of new technology is more productive than old capital, and that technological and process innovation is the most powerful driver of productivity. So technology and innovation is what is really important. According to Solo, humanity need not to conquer new worlds and acquire the resources to get richer. We need to innovate within our existing context. Right? We all know that if you look at history, when a group of people exhaust the resources, they simply went along and acquire other people's resources or other territories. This is a way for us to grow. This is what we've done. His idea is that we don't need to do that. What we need to do is we need to innovate and use technology to be able to free us from having to get other people's or other resources. So I've taken an example here from the hospitality industry, which is treating food waste via anaerobic digesters. That's innovation. In other words, it's sort of this idea of I have a resource, it's called food, and we use it, and unfortunately we create waste through, you can name it breakfast and the buffets and the brunch. We create that waste. What do we do with the waste? I mean, in traditional thinking, the waste becomes garbage and goes to the dump or gets to the incinerator and so on. In the Solovian thinking is, can that become a resource that we can use and innovate? And so this idea of, well, okay, we're going to take the food waste, we're going to put it in anaerobic digesters, bacteria is going to work on it in an oxygen-free environment, create methane. We're going to keep the methane, and we're going to use that methane either as gas to cook again, or we're going to refine it and put it in our cars and our trucks and so on. So it's looking at using technology to deal with the problems. In the Malthusian form, it will be not to create so much food in the first place, right? So that's the two different methods. So what do they say to each other, the Malthusian and the Solovians then? The Malthusians see the Solovian as delusional and utopian because they seem to deny that a wall exists, much less that it is getting dangerously close. Malthusians worry that by arguing that technological innovation will provide a solution, Solovian risk lulling the public into failing to reduce, reuse, and recycle as much as it is required. Because at the end of the day, if, for example, my example with food, if food can be turned into a resource to create energy, Why do I have to restrain myself? I might as well create the waste, but the waste is not really waste. It's a resource for me to power my home, let's say. Okay. Solovians see Malthusians as dreary and really depressive. They fear that Malthusian will resist the possibilities contained in innovation and thereby hobble attempts to improve the quality of our lives. Solovians fear that if we focus on restraint, we may delay our collision with the Malthusian wall, but we will never innovate our way over it, and thus the Malthusian prescription ensures the fate that we are desperate to avoid. So it seems to be that there's a little bit of a great divide between ways on how to deal with the problems. So this was sort of setting this into the, right, this is why I said I've taken you perhaps out of your sort of comfort zone with what you know, and just show you, you know, what sort of the philosophical approaches are out there. What does it look like in hospitality? I'm sort of thinking, if I take a Malthusian approach to running my business, what could that look like? Or if I take a Solovian approach, what does it look like? So I've just decided to take two examples of perhaps what can be called a Malthusian approach. And so this is, it could have been, I could have taken many different examples. I've chosen this one because I thought it was interesting. This is called Resort Baumgeflüster. It's in northern of Germany. And it is, in many ways, it is a bit of a Malthusian approach because it is simple. It is simple. It is using local construction material. As you can see, those cabins, those hotel rooms, those lodges are in a forest, and building those cabins is used the forest, the local forest that grows there. Okay? It's very low tech. It's very simple, and as you can see, it's based all on mostly on local construction materials. So it's really about restraining ourselves. It's about low tech, and this is in a way a bit Malthusian as an approach to hospitality. Okay, so that's one way. And this, of course, for many of the customers, they will consider this to be quite a green hotel. You see, this is a green hotel. Not only are you in the middle of the green, you're in the middle of the forest, but the fact that it's sort of simple and using local product, that fits quite well in the green hotel movement. Solovian hotel. So here we go. I have taken a hotel which is open recently. It's just outside my door, more or less, in the city where I come from, in Bonn. This is called the Camea Grand Hotel. It's one of the leading hotels of the world. And as you can see, it has a fairly big steel structure with plenty of windows, aluminum, and it's got high technology. It's quite luxurious. It's a 5-star property. And it has a geothermal heat pump in a cellar that can take the heat or store the heat and do heat transfer to either cool your building or heat up your building. You can do different things with geothermal technology. I mean, you could actually create power to power your business. The hotel doesn't. It's using a heat pump. In other words, it's trying to cool down or heat up the building. And currently, by using that technology, it covers about 70% of the heating cooling needs of the hotel with this geothermal heat pump. So this hotel is a very Solovian approach. It's like using technology. In other words, it's got a very low output when it operates because it doesn't use oil or gas to do the work of cooling or heating. And for many, this would be the example of a green hotel. It's got very low output. It uses low energy. Not zero quite, but low energy. Right? And they probably have also recycle and things like that. But in principle, this is much more Solovian. It's the high use of technology to be able to operate your hotel. So that's the questions. Are both considered green hotels? I don't need you to answer right away. How about your thoughts on that? It's two different approach, and that was my question. This could be considered sort of a Malthusian approach. This could be considered a Solovian approach. I mean, the idea is, can we combine the two of them and sort of have perhaps a truly green property? We'll discuss this in a minute. Now, I've done a little bit of talking now, and I'd like you to actually do just a little bit of work to sort of move a little bit and talk to your colleagues that are sitting at a table. I'd like you to work on 3 short questions. We're not going to take too long, 5 minutes maybe. And those are fairly straightforward and simple, perhaps question, or perhaps not. first of all, how would you define this sustainable hospitality? Even before I go into environmental management system, what does it mean to you anyways? The second part is sustainability important to hoteliers? And the third part is, from your experience, what are the motivation behind a hotelier to implement sustainable initiative? What motivates people to do so? Or what stops them? What are the barriers? And those are the, basically, I think those are the three questions I'd like you to work on. Can we take 5 minutes? You sort of brainstorm in your small group, and then I'll just go to the table and you share with the rest of the, is that okay? So take 5 minutes, a quick definition, what does it mean? Do you find this to be important, and what motivates hoteliers to do something? Thank you. So normally, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I know that it's very good to see that some of you are in already deep discussion for something relatively simple, I would hope. But normally, I would ask you to sort of, I would take a piece of paper and give it to you, and you can. But for this first part, I think I'm just going to ask you at the table. So your ideas. Perhaps there's no right or wrong answers, just to have a little bit of your feedback. So I don't know, maybe we can go sort of from my side clockwise. And perhaps start with, is that okay? Maybe you have, you want to share your idea of sustainable hospitality. What, I know that the discussion usually it's quite normal, you do it in Estonian, so now you sort of have to translate for me. But what would be understood behind this idea of sustainable hospitality?
From a business point of view, we save money.
You save money. And I think you've got the answer to the first motivator.
And the money is also the barrier.
And you've got the answer to the first barrier.
Yes, but when we talked about this sustainability, hospitality, then we came up with to the kind of values what we share with our clients.
Right.
So it becomes more and more important, and in one point you are out of the competition if you don't follow the rules or the values.
Okay. So set by your guests, but also the market, I would imagine, the competitors,
yes.
And perhaps as a society as large,
yes.
With the values and things evolve.
There will be the percentage of sort of green view will be spread out more.
Starts with the kids, right? I mean, what we do in education to the kids, I mean, these are the future, right? Okay, so fair enough. So it is sort of a set of values, and it's driven by your guests and society at large and your competitors. It's also what you've said a little bit perhaps about this idea of staying up to date with the competition, so being on the same bandwagon, more or less, for some hotels, not to be left behind for some hotels. Okay, fair enough. Very good. I'll come back to the barriers and motivators. And oh no, but perhaps I can ask you: is that important, sustainability, then for hoteliers? Is that yes, no, or maybe? It's important.
Absolutely, because you make plans always not to the next year only, but you think about next 10 years or even 20 years. So the sustainability is highly important.
Okay. The reason why I asked the question is because I've asked this question around the globe, and I get quite different answers depending on where we are. And I've had quite a few hoteliers that have said no. So it really depends. I think this culture plays a role. I think culture and the geographical location of where we are plays a role. But this is what I tend to have, of course, in Germanic and here in Estonia. The answer is often yes, because of the fact of dealing with those resources that actually cost us a lot of money. Okay, let's have your view on sustainable hospitality, just shortly. What keywords or a definition and so on?
Well, we didn't write anything down.
All right, it's okay. Discussion is okay.
Improvising as I go. But I think that in Estonia, the sustainability aspect is rather obvious. Because we haven't had this kind of consumption, like the US had.
Right.
We haven't consumed that much. We have always been rather nature, nature thing. So
It's,
to define it.
would you say it's like second nature? Like sustainability in terms of behavior is almost second nature to people. That would then make things easier. So then the question is already answered. Is sustainability important to hoteliers? You would say yes, yeah, of course. Okay. Your group, any added sort of for sustainable hospitality? What was your brainstorming?
So we agree with the previous opinions. So first of all, it's safe of money, energy, and of course, Estonia is very nature-oriented country. We have so wild nature. That is what attracts many tourists to here, because our forests are so-called wild and
That's right.
untouched, and this is our opportunity to use.
This is it. I mean, this is what's so interesting. I mean, you have something which is really free of charge in this country, which is the beauty of the scenery, right? I mean, this is something that's available to the hoteliers free of charge in practice. Yeah, you've got the sceneries, you've got people that can come for this. It's just like a hotel that's in the Alps that's got the mountains free of charge in front of them. Also a hotel that's close to the beach that's got a beach free of charge, in principle, of course. So, of course, we don't want to pollute that beach because then it's not right, there's problems and so on. So the argument is valid, obviously. Right? It's something that's quite important, and then therefore the second question is answered as well. It's important. So how about you?
We put down 3 words, so 3 different aspects.
Yeah.
One is environmental,
Yeah.
the other one is economical,
Yeah.
and the third one is it's like social.
Sure.
So it's to the second question also, I think we answered yes, but we discussed that it's more popular or elementary, the environmental part, but we think that maybe the hoteliers don't think so much about the social part.
Do you know why is that? Is it because it's more difficult to measure, perhaps?
Yeah.
That's one of the issue. I mean, usually when we talk about those 3 pillars, which really is sort of one of the base of sustainable development, is obviously economic is essential. I mean, there's one famous talk, I don't remember the name, I think it's Ron Finlay. He's a sort of a green eco gardener in Los Angeles. He's in one area of Los Angeles which is very deprived. In the entire neighborhood, there's no fresh food. If you want to feed yourself, it's fast food or it's 7-Eleven and so on. So there's basically no access to fresh food. He says if I want an apple, like an organic apple, I've got to drive 45 minutes out of the city. And he says so he's planting gardens in vacant lot and on the side of the street, sidewalk, because the sidewalks are actually supposed to be taken care of by citizens. And normally it's grass that grows there, it's boring. So he says, so he goes with sort of other eco sort of green gardeners, takes the grass out and he starts planting zucchinis and tomatoes, and he takes vacant lots, and it's basically they're moving that neighborhood into sort of green gardening. He's calling himself like green gangster. Like, in the video he says your weapon of choice is a shovel, to go in. So the reason why I say so is because he says what's interesting about sustainability is you've got to sustain it economically, right? I mean, sustainability has got a very strong economic basis. You're not economically profitable to be able to reinvest in your business, then obviously it's not going to work. It's not going to work. And it tends to be that the economic pillar is well measured, because that's what we're required to do by law in any case. The environmental measurements, we're going to talk about it a bit later, but for many hotels that's relatively well covered, even though it's very difficult for the guests to compare hotels because there's not an accepted standard. There are some, if you take some initiatives you can follow, then you have comparison tools, but it is easier to measure. And the social, what you've just said, it's perhaps not well taken care of, which is a bit of a problem, because there's actually lots of abuses in hospitality of social aspect. Yes, please.
But I would like to add that we will discuss also not only about the neighborhood, but also about the workforce.
Yeah, sure.
Because sustainability is also about, let's say, about customer service.
Mm-mm.
So we have to keep our workers, and this is also part of sustainability.
It's a bit, I think, seotud with the seasonality in Estonia, because we have a lot of seasonal workers, and every year you have to teach new personnel. It would be more sustainable if you have the same personnel doing things.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, when you have seasonality, then the strategy is to think how to bridge the seasonality. That's the biggest challenge. And there's different techniques to do so, as you probably know, because you're in this field as well. But one of the initiative, which started about 15 years ago, which I think is quite an amazing initiative, on Vancouver Island, where I worked in hospitality, we are faced with seasonality as well. So the summers are great. We get lots of Asians, lots of Americans traveling because it's beautiful sceneries and nature. It's similar, right, to here. But the winter season, of course, is it's a dead season on the west coast. So the hoteliers have gotten together, just like in a room like this. We have discussed how to deal with this seasonality, and the idea came up. We have amazing storms on the Pacific Oceans. So in the winter, the nature is wild, right? You got storms, you got big waves crashing, and you've got rain and the wind, and most people don't come to the beach for that. And you know what we've done back then, and it's amazing. We've created a season called the storm watching season. It's a season where customers are invited to come and experience the wild nature of winter, rain and storm and so on. So you may think, oh, come on, I tell you, this is to get a hotel room throughout the winter season when it's storm season is very difficult. People come, the hotels, what we've done is when people check in, they get automatically one of those yellow suits, you know, a cap and the boots, and they get the whole equipment so that they can go on the beach when it's raining, and then we come back and we do tea, and right? So we do everything that's around the program of storm watching as a way to sort of bridge, at least to offer some bridge and create employment throughout the year. So this is where you have sort of, I think as an industry, that's your responsibility to start thinking about that seasonality and what can be done to bridge. And sometimes it's a matter of maybe a bit Solovian sort of innovation in the product development. So that's a good, perhaps a good example. I think, I think we can use that a little bit. So, in principle, there isn't really an accepted definition. To be honest, this is why I was asking you a little bit. There is a sort of an accepted definition of sustainable tourism, which I then draw this idea of sustainable hospitality. Is hospitality that takes full accounts of its, and then we have the three pillars: economic, environmental, and social impacts in addressing the needs of what you've mentioned. You also the needs of its guests, industry partners, suppliers, and so on, tour operators, and so on. Employees and host communities. It sounds like it's a bit of a conceptual definition, not too much. It's not a how-to. It's not telling you, and this is what you're going to do. Right? It's just to set up the framework. You all probably know the original definition from sustainable development. I mean, we're talking 1987 Brundtland report, which is actually available free of charge online. It's called the Brundtland Report because it was headed by Gro Harlem Brundtland, Prime Minister of Norway back then. The report is called Our Common Future, and it set, back then in '87, it set really the base of our new understanding of sustainable development. I mean, sustainable development has been around actually a long time. The word sustainable development it's actually first been coined by a German forestry engineer in the 1800s. He talked about Nachhaltigkeit. So it's coined actually 200 years ago, the word sustainable development. But the A newer version, the way that we understand it, is from 1987. And sustainable development is a development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. That's the conceptual definition of sustainable development from which we work. Okay, let's go quickly to the barriers and motivators, and then I'll show you the result of a survey we've done about that. Barriers and motivators, I think we've got one you've mentioned, sir. A motivator is cost savings, and a barrier will be the potential investments and the questions about the return on that investment. Any other that you would say are relevant as well in terms of motivators and barriers? Or those are the main one? And is there any sort of intrinsic motivation? I mean, hoteliers, are there hoteliers that are intrinsically sort of innerly motivated to do something good? Or is it business driven mostly?
I mean, every hotelier should think like a client. So in this sense, they are not only business motivated. But I would say that also the expectations of the clients, if, for example, in our hotel, we say water.
Yeah.
We are special, I don't know how they're called, but
Diffusers. For the tap?
What controls the shower? And,
Yeah, the low flow shower heads and the diffusers, yes, I saw that.
And at first the question was that the expectations of the clients were that I want more water. Now in 2-3 years we have had none complaints anymore. But at first it was that there is something wrong with your water system. So it may be the barrier that it comes like maybe a very, very small part, but still the feelings of the client.
Yeah, I completely relate to this.
And you have to explain why is this.
Sure.
And if you explain it, then it's okay.
Yeah.
But it may, for example, be some of the barriers.
I have, as I told you, I spent quite a bit of time lecturing this subject in Dubai, as you can imagine, sustainable development and hotel industry in Dubai. We were at sometimes at complete opposites, not always. But I had exactly the same discussion with one of the personnel from the Jumeirah Hotel, and they did the same. The water consumption is one of the highest on the planet for the hotels in Dubai, in a land where there's actually no water. And he's installed low-flow shower heads as well, and he's kept some old one just in case he would have massive complaint to be able to go and quickly fix the line and put a right. But he's put that, and obviously he's very happy, and he's got now no complaints as well. They're pretty efficient, let's face it, right? They're pretty efficient. Okay, barriers and motivators from your side?
Being green is a great selling point.
It's great selling, so good for the image and potentially marketing. Okay, so that's a motivator.
Green and your partner competition is, so it might be an obstacle.
It's interesting you say that, because it may be good for the to be competitive, but it's interesting to see how many hotels actually do not communicate it at the time of booking. They communicate it in their rooms, they communicate it once the guest is here, but they don't communicate it when the guests are actually booking, which is what really should happen. Yes?
I read a study about 7-8 years ago about the United States market, and there was a question of green behavior and green marketing, and the study pointed out that actually clients don't care about green marketing, but green behavior is very important. So when I say in our commercials that we are very green, nobody cares.
Yeah.
They hate to hear it.
That's right.
But they want to see it.
That is actually taking place. That survey has been repeated just, I think the result just came out in April now by one of the distributors, TripAdvisor. I'll show you the result because it's changed a little bit, but it goes in the same direction, even though there's a fairly large amount of people that would wish to be better informed about the initiative. But of course, it's got to be followed by behavior, because otherwise you're greenwashing, basically. Barriers?
One barrier might be that there is not enough information, or maybe it's difficult to find best technologies that you can implement.
Okay. So knowledge about this and perhaps information about potential return on investment is fairly important for hoteliers to make a decision. And of course, there will be differences whether you're part of a hotel chain, whether you're a management contract, whether you're a franchisee, or whether you're an owner, about the investment in any case. So, okay, fair enough. Motivators and barriers?
Very strong motivator is
Economic, yeah.
Saving the energy, water helps to save the money, of course. And the barrier is that not so much knowledge. The hoteliers are not so much aware of how.
I mean, yeah. The life of a hotelier is, you've got about 60 different other things to think about, from the operational issues with anything to your marketing to what. So perhaps some of those then gets pushed to the side as not being on a top priority, and therefore the knowledge possibly. This is slightly changing, by the way, because the reason I say so is because if I look at most of the sort of hospitality program, management program, most of them now have got courses on either it's hotel engineering or facilities management linked to sustainability. That means that a new generation coming up will have perhaps a greater awareness of some of the technology and some of. So, okay, very good. Thank you so much. And anything to add in this case? Barriers and motivators, please.
I would say that the motivators are pressure from outside, from customers, money, the most important probably, and maybe a personal attached to this. It's like gaining the karma debt, or thinking about your own children or your own family.
So intrinsic motivation.
A little bit. And barriers, knowledge.
Okay.
It's really complicated, the system that and the measurement. It's as you said, there are 60 other things to think about, and it should be not as a separate thing in one of those 60, but it has to be a way of thinking behind all those 60. Mm-hmm. So maybe this, and also money, probably the first investment is quite big, so they postpone it.
Mm. That's right. I mean, it really depends what a hotel wants to do and wants to start with. And the perception is that there's going to be a high investment, but again, you can start with staff training. It would be one of the way to perhaps have a low investment and have some kind of return. So let's have a look. Thanks very much. I think all of those are relevant, and they all come back in a survey, by the way. So we've done multiple surveys. It's always difficult. We've done a survey here in 2012. We distributed to 4,000 hotels. Mostly, they're around the globe. Mostly it's Europe, 72%. A response rate of 7.2%, which is quite normal, which means we have 290 hotels. Okay, most of them are in Europe, some in Asia, and so on. So it's quite representative of Europe rather than other regions. The categories, more than 75% were in sort of more luxurious categories, and the size, so 62% with 51 rooms and more, with 20 with 250 rooms and more, which is representing of this hotel, for example, and about 37% with smaller properties. So we have across the board. I don't show you here now all the breakdown according to the categories and to the size. It varies a little bit, the responses. I'll show you just general responses. Is sustainability important to your operation? No surprise to you. 93% important to very important. 6% are unsure whether it's important. And that we could break down according to the geographical area, because that 6% onshore comes often from somewhere else. Europe is higher, and 1%, a very small amount, is rather unimportant. We've asked, not so much about environmental management system, we've asked, have you invested in sustainability? I don't show you all the questionnaires, but there was other questions leading to this, but I'm presenting you here the results of, we've asked them within the last 5 years, have you undertaken investment? The majority says, yeah, of course we've invested in sustainability. Then I'm going to show you in what did they invest. 12% no, 10% are unsure because perhaps they're unsure about what is meant by sustainability, even though we had defined it for them. If we look at where have you invested, so this is where it's interesting. The majority have invested in technology or training related to energy efficiency. It doesn't come as a surprise if you look at the energy prices in most of the European countries. When I think of hotels in Germany that pays anywhere between 22 and 24 cents kilowatt hours, which is one of the second highest I think in the world. The French hoteliers pay about 13 cents for kilowatt hours. So there's lots of money spent so much. It's become the second largest expenses. So therefore, there's a big drive here in reducing those. 52% in waste reduction, 45% in process. So they could answer multiple, right? So that's why it doesn't add up to 100% because they could answer multiple. 45% have invested in recycling and a small amount of, 21% in architecture. Other areas mentioned was, and it could be anything, it was open to them to just say what they've done. So a quick listing on water saving device, on certification. They've invested on project tree planting, which is quite common, or they've done some staff training. They've implemented organic food, organic soaps, they recycled their soaps. Some of them have implemented geothermal energy, I've mentioned earlier. So those were some of the answers given by the hotelier. This place.
What is this sustainable architecture?
Sustainable architecture will involve things such as proofing for windows, for example, moving from single glazed to double glazed windows, doing change within your architectural building. Okay, so in the questionnaire we had actually further listing about that. So it's about the actual component, architectural component of your building. It could mean also insulation, extra insulation, for example, and things like that. It could also mean passive techniques of passive solar techniques in terms of air movement within your building, so ensuring some natural air movement and things like that. So, and the top 5 motivators to invest in sustainability: reach potential cost saving, which is exactly what you've mentioned. This is really what the motivator is. Linked to this, of course, is achieve energy efficiency. It's obviously related to cost saving. And show social responsibility because it's linked to this. We've done, how do you call this? We've done, we sort of compared the responses of who answers what. We've done correlation work. And show social responsibility is linked to sort of image improvement. And, what we've mentioned here, it's sort of the idea of gaining market share. Some of the hotels have mentioned sort of the reduction of carbon footprint, perhaps as a sign of the fact that we might be heading towards some kind of carbon taxation, or that carbon was high in the agenda, in the media, so people are aware, and so therefore. Also mention competitive advantages and this idea of intrinsic motivation. So some hotels have said, we just want to do something good. I've actually interviewed some hoteliers that are truly, they believe, yeah, this is all good, but really I just want to run and they tend to be private hoteliers more than chain hoteliers, that simply say, I want to run my business, but I want to do it good. So that's an intrinsic motivation. And to enhance employee morale. In any survey, you have to remember that the people answering the survey are probably people that are interested in the subject in the first place. So it could be skewed. You understand? If you receive a survey and it says it's about environmental issue in your hotel, whoever answers this might be first interested by the subject. In other words, it could well be positively skewed, that whole survey. Because people there say, oh no, environmental survey, yeah, I don't answer. So it could well be that. We always have to keep that in mind. So, top barriers, perceive high capital cost. So here we go. We've got perceive, I want to reach cost saving, but it's going to cost me money, right? It's this idea of I've got to be able to spend money to save money. That's really what the dilemma that we're in, okay? And linked to the perceived high capital cost, which is not always the case, depending on the activity. That's the perception. There's doubts on the return on investment. So, you know, a hotelier decide, okay, I'm going to put solar water heaters or photovoltaic panels. What is the return on investment? What can I expect? I have to calculate, okay, well, I sell the energy to the grid, I buy it back cheaper, I've got some subsidies, and many hoteliers just don't want to go to the trouble. So there's doubts on whether it makes sense for them. Okay, I'm going to change my windows. What is the return on investment? What is the return on investment on light and so on? The complexity of implementation, lacking of knowledge education is what was mentioned quite a lot. And quite a few hotels said, listen, we just don't have the staff to do any of this. We're already running short of staff in most of our operation. If on top I've got to take staff out to create perhaps a team that can meet sometimes to think about it, I just can't do it. The perception is I can't do that because I'm already running short on staff. So that's perceived as a barrier from implementing anything. So lack of time requires too much management, limited interest, or lack of local relevance. Okay, so bigger. So that was the survey that we've done. Again, if you want the full results, we actually got an article on it, so I can share that with you. Bigger. So I go back now from talking about this, and I want to discuss a little bit about the size of our business and then go into environmental management system. This is probably nothing new for you. It is an amazing business, the tourism business, when you think about it. If you look at 2008, 2009, 2010, when so many other industries have seen dips in their growth and went into decline, one of the industry that keeps growing year on to year on is the tourism industry. So the need to travel seems to be inherent in people's willingness to do so. So we spend a lot of money on it. It provides a lot in terms of gross domestic product. It employs a lot of people. I've attended a conference recently. I don't have the exact number, but if we look at for every €1 million of investment, the hospitality industry is the one that's the most social in a way that employs the most per investment compared to any other industry. So whether you invest $1 million in the auto industry, or you invest $1 million in banking, or you invest $1 million in hospitality, if you compare those industries, the rate of employment is the highest in the hospitality per investment. In other words, it's in principle a very social business because it employs people, because we need people. So there's a lot of people working in this industry. It not necessarily means it's all great jobs, but there's lots of people working in this industry. We've just reached in December 2012 the so-called 1 billion international arrival, bringing lots of receipt to the business. And of course, when you have a growing business, you have growing emissions. As I said, we haven't learned to grow a business without having emission. The tourism industry represents about 5%. These are the sort of agreed number from the UNEP. 5% of all carbon emissions in this industry is in the world is the tourism industry, and within tourism you have transportation, you have restaurants and so on. The hotel sector is about 20% of that. So in other words, 1% of the global CO2 emissions come from the hotel sector. There's lots of pressure out there to change our business pattern. There are so many publications over the last 2 years telling you, the business, come on, do something about green. Not only is it good, but you can earn some good money, you can change your practices, and that's the way of the future. So if you want information, it's actually available. There is a lot out there for entrepreneurs, for business people. One of the reasons why the hotel sector is one of the large emitters within the service industry. This is a bit of a complicated graph, but I've put a circle here of what interests me actually in this graph. One of the issues with hospitality, with hotels in particular, is the fact that we have multiple activities per square meters here. We have, we might have sauna and pools and hotel guest room and restaurants and so on. You have so many different activities within one sector, within one building that is running 24 hours a day and 365 days a year, that the overall impact is actually quite great in terms of consumption. And this is another conference that takes place in Bonn, where I come from. It's a climate conference, and there's a section on buildings. And it is found that if you look at the different form of sector of activities, so agriculture or transport and so on, these are the carbon equivalent, the carbon emission Okay, and it's found that it's actually buildings, the operation, the running of buildings around the globe, that is the greatest emitter of carbon dioxide. There's 48% of energy use goes into operating the buildings, for which, of course, the hotels are either a big owner or a big manager of buildings. The reason why this is so interesting is because that's where the most potential for saving of CO2, for mitigating the CO2 are located. So people, I've got, the travel industry as we see prospering, there's a desire to travel, we expand, and so far we've been pretty good, at least some hotels, at measuring the output. This is what we do. We run our property and we can measure sort of kilowatt hours per square meters. We can measure sort of waste per guest night or water use in cubic meters. We do that. We do an output measurement. The question is, does input matter? And the answer is, of course, it does matter a lot, because we've got as much emission in the input as the output. There's an old saying that says garbage in, garbage out. Okay, so this is the same idea. When we look at output, some numbers, many of those will be quite known to you, I would imagine. So here, in terms of output, numbers vary, but 170 to 440 liters of water consumption per guest night in the luxury hotel segment. In Dubai, it's actually 560 liters, which is massive, due to many pools, of course, and fresh, different operational practices. An average of 1 kilograms of waste per guest night. These are different numbers from research. I've got the reference here if you're interested. This is carbon dioxide per room day average. And this is a New Zealand research, Switzerland, German, and US, and it varies quite a bit, I must admit to you. We're looking at anywhere between 8 kilograms of CO2 to 34 kilograms in upscale hotels. There's some other research by the Environmental Agency in the US that looks at 160 to 200 kilograms of CO2 per square meter in the hospitality industry. That is not including the diet that we offer our customers. And there's a great research by Kim and Neff 2009 that looked at the diet of people and the carbon emission related to this diet, and found out that a non-vegetarian diet adds up to about 8 kilograms of CO2 emissions per person per day, due to the meat production system that we have in place in terms of growing the protein and feeding the animals and working with the agricultural output. So that's the output here. Of course, I've got my little boy here who eats the vegetables, and of course his father is happy with lots of meat eating. This is often we say we want the kids to eat healthy, but the parents were perhaps not quite so healthy. And the boy doesn't look very happy, I must say. In terms of input, there's so much that we can tell. The choice of material and construction method will significantly change the amount of what we call embodied energy in the structure of the building. In other words, remember when I showed you one of that resort, a wood resort? I mean, wood is one of the low embodied energy material, construction material. I've taken the example of a 1 meter 20 by 1 meter 20 window with double glazing. If just to build the frame, if you take aluminum, and aluminum doesn't come as a raw material, you take bauxite and you do aluminum smeltering. It's a very energy intense way of material. The process of building that frame will take about 279 kilograms of CO2 just to build one frame. The same frame in polyvinyl chloride, which is hard plastic, which is a byproduct of the petroleum industry, will take about 120 kilograms, whereas the same frame in timber will take about 12 to 25 kilograms. I don't want to tell you that timber is better, because of course if you build a tower like this one, you can't build tower with timber. All right? So you have to use steel and concrete, and potentially you want to use PVC or aluminum, because aluminum is good for a long time and it requires no care, which for many buildings this is great. Timber is in principle a low embodied energy and it's a renewable because trees grow again, but timber needs to be taken care of. We know very much that after 5 years you have to take care of your timber. You've got to retreat it and paint it and so on. It's just to get you some thinking about the input of what goes into refurbishing a hotel, into building perhaps a hotel, but into refurbishing the components that we use, from the carpet to the lights to the type of paint, has got as much as an impact as whatever output we have of those hotels. Of course, this idea is a life cycle assessment, which is something we have not done in this industry. We focus a lot on this here. When we set out reports, responsible reports that many companies have, we discuss this idea of output often. We may decide a little bit to discuss input in terms of some products, for example, food. We may say we use local food and organic, that will be part of the input. But most of it is got to do a lot about the output. The argument is input is as important, and that would be a life cycle assessment. This doesn't exist in our industry. It's very complicated in the first place. Other industries have done it. Some food industry have looked at individual food component, Nestlé for example, individual food component and the full impact of the production to the consumption, right? To throwing it away and so on. Some car industry have done it as well, Toyota in the past. To give you an example, waste for one here. I've got my input of food, so that's an input. I bring the food, and of course within my operation I've got to purchase, I've got to store, I've got to prepare, I've got to cook, and I serve it. We serve it, and the output is food waste. It's very difficult to eliminate food waste in our operation. And for many properties, this is the end. It's garbage and it's disposal. In a life cycle assessment, possibilities will think a bit different. The waste then can become an input. An input is the raw food waste becomes a new life through, as I've mentioned earlier, anaerobic digestion, where we create compost and we create methane. Methane, it can be used afterwards, so the output is the methane production, for example, which we go back as an input, because we can use the methane and we can use the gas to our operation for cooking, other purposes, and so on. Okay, so this is the idea of changing our thinking from just, you know, we call this cradle to cradle. So from baby to baby. It used to be cradle to grave. So this whole idea of from the raw material all the way to when we dispose it. But the thinking is moving. There's no waste as such, because nature does not produce waste. We produce waste, but nature doesn't. And so this idea is, what can waste, how can we economically exploit waste? Currently in many hotels, waste is seen as a cost, right? Creating waste is a cost to the business. Are there ways that waste can become, I almost feel like saying a profit center, maybe that's a bit too much asking, but is there a way that we can economically exploit that waste and turn it into a resource? Okay, so it requires a bit of shifting of thinking. I know some restaurants in the UK that have started to work with this, with portable anaerobic digesters, small, where the food waste goes to. They have compost bins for the garden, and they have a small anaerobic digester. So the thinking is switching to try to see, how can I deal with that waste? Okay, then I'm going to skip this, because really what I want to do is why have an environmental management program. So these are the 5, but I think we've got to go, because I know I have to be on time. I'm not quite finished. If that's okay with you, when we come back, this lunch now, we do lunch, or it's a break? It's lunch. So when we come back from lunch, I'd like to go over this before I go into marketing, just to make sure I'm finished. I'm a bit behind schedule because perhaps I talk too much, but I hope you found this relatively interesting. The afternoon, we're going to go a bit more into details now of different areas: environmental management system, marketing, and energy and carbon emissions. So I hope you've enjoyed the morning so far, and let's go for lunch.